The night did not arrive all at once. It came the way it usually did in that part of eastern Kentucky, slow, without ceremony, easing itself over the ridges as if it had learned long ago not to disturb what was already tired. Tom Hale noticed it from the back porch. He had stepped outside after supper, not because he needed anything, but because the house felt finished for the evening before he did. The dishes were done. The radio had been turned off. His wife, Ellen, had gone to bed early with a book she might or might not read. The familiar signals had lined up, quietly telling him there was nothing else required of him for the day. And yet, he stayed standing. The porch boards creaked the way they always had, one loose plank near the step, another near the post where the paint was starting to peel. He had meant to fix both. He had meant to fix a lot of things. That list lived somewhere in him, never written down, never urgent enough to become tomorrow's work. The air carried the smell of damp leaves and cooling dirt. Somewhere down the hollow, a dog barked once and then stopped, as if it, too, had reconsidered the effort. Tom rested his hands on the porch rail. They were broad hands, scarred in small places that no longer hurt when touched. Hands that had learned how to tighten bolts by feel alone, how to lift without straining, how to hold still when steadiness mattered more than strength. They were useful hands. They had always been. That fact had followed him most of his life, a quiet companion that had never asked much of him in return. Be available, be reliable, don't complicate things. There had been years when that felt like enough. Years when usefulness had felt close enough to purpose that he hadn't noticed the difference. Tonight, the distance between the two felt wider. The mountains across the valley had begun to darken, their edges softening as detail gave way to silhouette. He could still make out the old logging road cutting along the slope, the one his father used to walk when Tom was a boy. He remembered being told to stay close, to watch his footing, to move at the pace of the land instead of against it. Some things don't respond to pressure. The thought surfaced without announcement. It wasn't new. It had been circling him for months, maybe longer, showing up in small ways. When he paused too long before answering a simple question, when he finished a task and felt nothing afterward, when Sunday mornings felt heavier than Monday ones. Tom shifted his weight and listened. Crickets had begun their evening work, steady and unhurried. A breeze moved through the trees just enough to remind him they were there. The porch light stayed off. He hadn't turned it on, and no part of him felt the need to. He wasn't avoiding God. That was something he knew for certain. He still bowed his head before meals, still showed up to church, still carried gratitude the way a man carries a tool he's used for years, without ceremony, without doubt. Faith hadn't left him. It had simply grown quiet in a way he didn't know how to talk about. Useful people rarely do. Tom exhaled slowly, the breath leaving him without urgency. He realized he had been holding it, not tightly, just long enough to forget he was doing it. The night settled further. Nothing spoke. And yet, for the first time in a long while, he did not rush to fill the silence. Tom stayed on the porch longer than the temperature suggested he should. The chill came up slow from the hollow, settling first around his ankles, then along his calves, like something testing whether it had permission to stay. He didn't move. Inside the house, the floor creaked once, Ellen shifting in bed, maybe turning a page, maybe just turning a thought over until it found a better side. He knew the rhythm of those sounds. After all these years, the house spoke in ways that didn't require listening closely. It occurred to him, not sharply but clearly, that most of his life worked that way now. Everything functioned, everything held together, nothing asked for his full attention. He walked down the steps and stood in the yard instead. The grass was damp under his boots. Not wet enough to matter, just enough to remind him that the ground was still doing its quiet work, whether anyone noticed or not. He looked toward the barn. Old wood, darkened with age. Roof patched more times than he could count. He'd fixed it the way he fixed most things, enough to keep it standing, never enough to make it new. That had always seemed wise. Clarity doesn't always arrive as an answer. The thought came again, paired with another feeling he hadn't named before, a recognition, maybe, or the absence of one. He wasn't waiting for instructions. He was waiting to feel addressed. Tom walked a little farther, stopping near the fence line where the land dipped before rising again into trees. From there, the lights of a few distant houses dotted the hillside, small, steady points that didn't compete with the dark. He wondered, briefly, what the people inside them were doing, who was awake, who felt finished with the day, who felt unfinished with themselves. He rested his forearms on the fence rail. There had been a time, years back, before the kids moved out, before his father passed, when the weight he carried felt named, provider, husband, son. Those words had edges. They pressed back when leaned on. They gave shape to effort. Now the labels still applied, but they felt worn smooth, like stones carried too long in a pocket. He hadn't failed them. That was the strange part. He had done well by most measures. The emptiness wasn't accusing. It was quieter than that. It was simply present. Tom closed his eyes, not to pray exactly, not in the way he had been taught. He didn't bow his head or fold his hands. He just stood there, breathing, letting the sounds of the night settle into him without trying to sort them. A branch snapped somewhere deeper in the woods, a small animal most likely. He felt his shoulders tense out of habit, then release when nothing followed. He realized, standing there, that he had spent years responding to needs that announced themselves loudly. Repairs, deadlines, responsibilities that knocked instead of waited. Somewhere along the way, he had stopped listening for the things that spoke more softly. Not every season moves when pushed. The words did not arrive like a message. They arrived like recognition, like something he had known once and forgotten because forgetting had been easier than sitting still. Tom opened his eyes. The dark looked different now. Not changed, just seen. The hills hadn't shifted. The lights hadn't multiplied. But he felt less like a man standing at the edge of something and more like a man standing within it. He didn't feel comforted. He felt accompanied. And for reasons he couldn't have explained if asked, that was enough to keep him there a little longer. The cold eventually made its case. It wasn't sharp or demanding, just persistent enough to remind him that bodies still had limits even when thoughts wandered beyond them. Tom straightened from the fence and turned back toward the house, moving without hurry, as if speed might disturb something that had finally settled. Inside, the kitchen light cast a soft yellow square across the floor. He didn't turn on anything else. The quiet inside the house matched the quiet outside, and he felt an unexpected gratitude for that alignment. He poured himself a glass of water and drank it slowly, leaning against the counter. The hum of the refrigerator filled the space between sips. It was a sound he'd heard every day for years, yet tonight it felt newly noticeable, not irritating, not comforting, just present, like many things in his life. Tom glanced down the hallway toward the bedroom, then looked away. He didn't feel ready to sleep yet, not restless, just awake in a way that had nothing to do with energy. He sat at the small kitchen table instead. The chair creaked under his weight, familiar and unremarkable. He rested his forearms on the tabletop and studied the grain of the wood, tracing a darker knot with his eyes. Ellen had refinished the table years ago, sanding it down carefully, working through each layer without rushing. He remembered watching her, how she'd paused between passes, wiping the surface clean before deciding what came next. At the time, he'd thought she was just being thorough. Now he wondered if she had simply known something he hadn't. Tom folded his hands loosely. Not in prayer. Not in prayer either. He didn't ask for direction. He didn't ask for clarity. Those words felt too large for the space he was in. Instead, He stayed with the quiet that had followed him in from the porch, letting it stretch without trying to define it. Memories surfaced without warning. Not the big ones, the milestones people talk about, but small, unfinished moments. Standing beside his father in the early morning, waiting for fog to lift before starting work. Sitting in the truck outside the school after dropping the kids off, hands still on the wheel, listening to the engine idle. The pause before stepping into a room where people expected him to know what to do. He had always stepped in. Tonight, he stayed seated. There was a subtle ache behind his ribs. Not pain exactly, more like the awareness of something held too long. He placed a hand there without thinking, as if acknowledging it might be enough. Some things don't respond to pressure. He let the thought pass through him again, this time without resistance. He wasn't being told to act. He wasn't being told to wait. The relief came from realizing that neither was required in this moment. Tom leaned back in the chair and closed his eyes once more. In the darkness behind them, there was no voice, no instruction, no sudden understanding that rearranged his life. What there was, instead, was a steady sense of being seen without being examined, known without being evaluated. He hadn't realized how tired he was of proving usefulness until the need to do so quietly stepped aside. When he opened his eyes, the kitchen looked the same. The clock still ticked. The light still cast its patient square. Nothing had shifted outwardly, but something inside him had stopped bracing. Tom stood, rinsed his glass, and set it upside down in the drying rack. He turned off the light before heading down the hallway, leaving the kitchen to its darkness without hesitation. As he lay beside Ellen, listening to the slow, familiar rhythm of her breathing, he understood, not as a conclusion, but as a settled awareness, that the silence had not been empty after all. It had been waiting. And tonight, for the first time in a long while, he had not walked past it. Sleep came unevenly. Not the kind that drops a man into darkness and keeps him there, but the kind that lifts and lowers him, bringing him back to the surface just often enough to remind him that something inside was still awake. Tom lay on his back, eyes open, watching the faint outline of the ceiling take shape as his vision adjusted to the dark. Ellen shifted once, murmured something that never became words, then settled again. He did not reach for her, not because he didn't want to, but because he sensed that this wakefulness belonged to him alone. Some things did. He listened. The house made its nighttime sounds, the soft contraction of cooling wood, the distant click of the furnace cycling on and off. Outside, wind moved through the trees with more confidence now, not strong, just sure of itself. Tom thought about the word useful. It had always been a compliment when spoken to him. A kind one, a safe one. It meant he could be trusted. It meant he mattered in a way people depended on. But lying there, he realized how rarely anyone asked him what he wanted when no one needed anything. He wasn't resentful of that. He had chosen this posture long ago. He had learned early that being needed was a reliable way to belong. Still, usefulness had limits. It could fill days, it could organize years, but it could not always tell a man who he was when the demands grew quiet. Tom turned onto his side, facing the window. A thin line of moonlight slipped through the gap in the curtain, resting against the far wall. He watched it without thinking much about why. The light didn't move fast enough to measure, but it was moving all the same. Not every season moves when pushed. He felt the truth of that in his body now. The way the tension he'd carried had not disappeared, but softened like soil after rain, still heavy, but workable. The ache behind his ribs eased just enough to be noticeable. He closed his eyes again. This time, when sleep came, it stayed. Morning arrived quietly, without urgency. Tom woke before the alarm, the way he often did, but something about it felt different, not better, just unforced. He lay still for a moment, listening to the house reassemble itself into morning. Ellen's breathing changed. A bird called from somewhere close to the window. The world was beginning again, as it always did. He didn't feel rushed to meet it. When he sat up, there was no heaviness in the motion, no reluctance. He swung his feet to the floor and stood, pausing briefly, not out of fatigue, but out of habit. He noticed the pause this time. In the bathroom, he studied his reflection longer than usual. The lines around his eyes were deeper than they used to be. His hair had gone more grey than brown. None of this surprised him. What caught his attention was the absence of judgment in the looking. He wasn't measuring himself. That, more than anything, felt new. Downstairs, he brewed coffee and stood by the window while it finished, watching fog lift from the hollow in slow layers. The same land, the same morning, yet he felt less like he was bracing himself for the day and more like he was meeting it where it was. He took his mug onto the porch. The boards creaked again beneath his weight, unchanged. The loose planks still waited for repair. The mountains stood where they always had. Nothing had been fixed overnight. And yet, Tom took a sip of coffee and let it sit warm in his chest. He did not think about the lumber mill. He did not think about the list of things that needed doing. He let the morning exist without assigning himself a role in it. Clarity doesn't always arrive as an answer. Sometimes it arrives as permission. He didn't know what the quiet turning point would look like yet. He only knew this: whatever came next would not be driven by the need to be constantly useful. It would come from listening, really listening to the places inside him that had learned to speak without shouting. The fog continued to lift. Tom stayed on the porch until it was gone, feeling steady in a way that did not demand explanation. The day unfolded without announcement. Ellen moved through the kitchen with the same quiet efficiency she always had, setting toast on a plate, reaching for the butter without looking. They exchanged a few words, ordinary ones, about the weather, about whether the creek might flood if the rain came, like they said it would. Nothing in her tone suggested she sensed any shift in him. Tom found a strange comfort in that. Not everything needed to be witnessed. He drove to the mill just after 7. The road curved the way it always had, hugging the side of the ridge, offering brief glimpses of the valley before pulling him back into trees. He'd driven it so many times that his hands knew when to turn before his eyes did. At work, the familiar rhythm met him, machines humming, men nodding hello, a loose belt that needed tightening, a forklift making a sound it shouldn't. Tom moved through these things with practiced ease, his body responding before his thoughts caught up. He was still good at this. That hadn't changed. What had changed was the space he noticed between tasks, the brief moments when nothing immediately required him. Normally, he filled those spaces without thinking, checking something, adjusting something, finding a way to justify his presence. Today, he let them be. It felt uncomfortable at first, like standing still in a place where movement was expected. He noticed how quickly his mind reached for reasons, explanations, proof of value. He didn't scold himself for it. He simply noticed some things don't respond to pressure. Around mid-morning, he stepped outside alone. The air smelled of sawdust and oil, sharp and familiar. He leaned against the building, coffee cup warming his hands, and watched clouds gather over the far ridge. They moved slowly, carrying their weight without urgency. For the first time in a long while, Tom did not feel the need to interpret the moment. He didn't ask what it meant. He didn't wonder what came next. He let it stand as it was. A younger man, newer to the job, walked past and hesitated, as if unsure whether to ask something. Tom met his eyes and waited. The man eventually spoke, asked a simple question, one Tom answered easily. When it was done, the man thanked him and walked on. Useful, yes. But not only that, Tom realized, standing there, that usefulness did not have to consume him to remain true. It could be offered without becoming his entire shape. The thought settled gently. without argument. The afternoon passed. When he drove home, the light had shifted. Late-day sun stretched long across the road, catching dust in the air, turning it gold. Tom slowed without realizing it. Not enough to inconvenience anyone, just enough to match the pace of the evening. At the house, he did something small and unplanned. He walked past the porch steps and toward the fence line instead. The loose boards could wait. He stood where he had stood the night before, hands resting on the rail, looking out over the land. The creek murmured faintly below. Birds moved through the trees, preparing themselves for night. Nothing spoke, and yet he felt no urge to leave. The emptiness he had named before was still there, but it no longer felt hollow. It felt open, like a field left fallow on purpose, like ground that had been allowed to rest. Clarity doesn't always arrive as an answer. Sometimes it arrives as a quiet understanding that this listening, this unhurried attention is part of the work. Tom stayed until the light faded. When he finally turned back toward the house, he did so without the old weight pressing him forward. He was not late to anything. He was not behind. He was simply present, and for now, that was enough. Night returned the way it always did, but Tom noticed how differently he received it now. After supper, he washed the dishes while Ellen dried them, their movements practiced and wordless. The radio stayed off. Neither of them reached for it. When they finished, Ellen paused at the sink and looked at him, not searching, not concerned, just present. "You all right?" she asked. It wasn't a test, just a check-in, the way people do when they've lived beside someone long enough to sense when the air has shifted. Tom considered the question longer than he normally would have. "I think so," he said finally. And then, after a moment, added, "Yeah, I am." It surprised him how true it felt. Ellen nodded, accepting the answer without asking him to shape it further. She kissed his cheek and went to the bedroom, leaving him standing alone in the kitchen with the quiet once again. He stepped outside. The porch greeted him with the same familiar sounds. The night air carried a hint of coming rain. Clouds moved across the sky, thick enough to hide the stars, but not heavy enough to threaten. Tom sat this time instead of standing. The chair rocked gently beneath him, just enough to feel movement without going anywhere. He rested his hands on his thighs and let his shoulders drop fully, something he realized he rarely allowed himself to do. He thought about the years ahead, not in detail, not as plans or goals, just as a stretch of time that did not need to be filled tonight. He thought about the man he had been, the one who learned early how to hold things together. He felt a quiet respect for that version of himself. He also felt, for the first time, permission to loosen his grip. Not every season moves when pushed. The truth of it no longer felt instructional. It felt lived. Tom closed his eyes and sat in the dark, without trying to turn the moment into anything else. There was no request forming in him, no question waiting to be answered, only a steady sense of being met exactly where he was. Useful, yes, but also allowed to be more than that. When the first drops of rain fell, he didn't rush inside. They landed softly on the porch roof, spaced far apart at first, then closer together. He listened as the sound grew fuller, rounder, until it became a steady presence. He realized then what the quiet turning point was. Not a change in direction, not a new calling announced from the dark, but a shift in how he carried himself within his own life. He did not need to earn God's nearness by staying busy. He did not need to fill every silence to be worthy of it. The rain continued. Tom sat until his sleeves dampened and the night cooled further. When he finally stood, it was without reluctance. He went inside, turned off the porch light he hadn't used, and closed the door gently behind him. As he lay down beside Ellen, he felt settled. Not finished, not solved, but aligned in a way that did not demand explanation. The silence remained, and this time he understood it had never been empty. It had been speaking all along. The rain lasted through most of the night, not the kind that pounds and demands attention, but the steady Appalachian kind that settles in and stays, soaking the ground slowly, teaching it patience. Tom woke once to the sound of it, and then again just before dawn, each time aware of it without feeling disturbed. When morning finally came, it arrived muted. Clouds hung low over the ridges, folding the world inward. The hollow looked smaller somehow, more intimate, as if the land itself had decided not to reach too far today. Tom dressed quietly and went downstairs before Ellen woke. He made coffee and stood by the window, watching water bead along the glass. A thin stream formed, then split, then disappeared at the sill. He felt no need to rush the day into shape. There was work to do later, there always was, but the morning felt like it belonged to listening. He wrapped his hands around the mug and let the warmth settle into him, noticing how easily his breath came, how little effort it took to simply stand there. For years, mornings had felt like a gate he had to push open. Today, it felt already open. He stepped onto the porch and breathed in the smell of rain-soaked earth. The loose boards were slick now, darker with moisture. He smiled faintly at the thought that they would need fixing soon, not out of obligation, but care. The land didn't ask him to hurry. A memory surfaced then, uninvited but gentle. He was young again, standing beside his father after a long day, both of them quiet, watching the sky change. No instructions had been given, no lessons explained, just presence shared. At the time, he hadn't understood the gift of that silence. Now, he did. Some things don't respond to pressure. Some truths only surface when a man stops trying to be impressive, even to himself. Tom felt gratitude rise in him, not sharp or emotional, but steady. Gratitude for the years that had shaped him. Gratitude for the faith that had not abandoned him in his quietness. Gratitude for a God who did not require noise to be near. He didn't speak any of it aloud. It didn't need words. Later that morning, Ellen joined him on the porch, pulling her sweater tighter against the cool air. She leaned into his shoulder, and he rested his head lightly against hers. They stood that way for a long moment, watching mist lift from the trees. "You seem lighter," she said softly. Tom considered that. "Maybe," he replied, "just not pushing so hard." She nodded, as if that made perfect sense. They went back inside together. The day would unfold. Responsibilities would return. People would need him. He would still show up. He would still fix what broke. That part of him wasn't going anywhere. But now, beneath all of it, there was something steadier than usefulness. A listening, a settled awareness that he was not late to his own life. And as the clouds slowly thinned and light began to find its way back into the hollow, Tom felt certain of this one quiet thing. The night had not changed him by speaking loudly. It had changed him by reminding him he was already being held. The week that followed did not announce itself as different. Tom woke early. He went to work. He answered questions. He tightened what was loose and steadied what shook. The rhythm of his days remained intact, almost stubbornly so, as if testing whether what had settled in him could withstand familiarity. It could. He noticed it in small places first, in the pause before responding, when he no longer rushed to fill space with certainty, in the way he walked across the yard at dusk, unhurried, even when there was still light enough to do more, in how he listened, really listened, when someone spoke without already leaning toward what came next. Nothing outwardly changed, yet nothing felt wasted anymore. One evening, he did fix the loose boards on the porch, not because they had been bothering him, and not because it felt overdue, but because the moment felt right. He worked slowly, measuring twice without telling himself he should already know the answer. The hammer rose and fell with a steady rhythm. When he finished, he sat down and ran his hand over the repaired wood, feeling its firmness beneath his palm. It was enough. That night, as darkness settled once more over the hollow, Tom sat in the chair and let the silence gather around him again. It came easily now, like something familiar, not demanding, not empty, present. He did not expect God to speak. He understood, finally, that God already had, not in words, not in instruction, but in the quiet permission to stop striving against his own season. Clarity doesn't always arrive as an answer. Sometimes it arrives as rest. Tom stayed there until the stars appeared in the breaks between clouds. He felt no urgency to name the future, no anxiety about whether he was doing enough, becoming enough. He had done what this moment required. He had listened, and in that listening, something inside him had settled into place, not fixed forever, not immune to doubt, but anchored, steady enough to carry what came next without losing himself along the way. When he stood to go inside, the night did not follow him with questions. It followed him with peace. The silence remained, and Tom no longer mistook it for absence. If this moment felt familiar, it's because many people reach it quietly, not burned out, not lost, just faithful for a long time and tired in a way that doesn't announce itself. There are seasons when nothing is wrong, yet something feels unfinished. When you're still useful, still dependable, still standing, yet a part of you has gone quiet, waiting to be noticed. This story wasn't meant to solve that feeling, only to sit beside it long enough for it to soften. If you recognized yourself here, you're not alone in that recognition. These stories are written for people who carry responsibility well, who rarely ask for attention, and who are learning, slowly, that silence can hold more than absence. If you want to stay in this kind of space, subscribe to the channel. Not for volume, not for noise, just for stories that understand this season. And when this video ends, stay with the one appearing on your screen. It continues the same quiet conversation for those who are still showing up and are finally learning how to listen.